This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. Another blockbuster episode this week, plenty going on. What is the real story with the New South Wales Labor Conference? It is the biggest and the best Labor conference in the country. For 99% of people, they don't give a rat's, but for political nerds, it is like Christmas. It is awesome. And no, National Conference is not the biggest or the best. It's what happens in Sydney Town Hall that really, really matters. Plus, what's going on with Albo's reshuffle? What is he really trying to achieve by demoting one of the ministers for poor performance and then putting her in one of the most important portfolios? I'll give you the real story behind that. All that and more coming up. Okay, first I'm going to throw a bit of red meat to all the political nerds out there. And quite frankly, if you're listening to this, you are a political nerd. This was, of course, New South Wales State Labor Conference, which is the best. It is awesome. There is, of course, a national conference that goes on. It's nowhere near as fun as what happens in New South Wales in Sydney Town Hall. This is the spiritual home of the Australian Labor Party. It is also the spiritual home of the New South Wales Right, which is the backbone of the Australian Labor Party, or at least it is when everything's going swimmingly. And we had the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, address the conference on Saturday. There were protesters outside. No one got inside. No one stormed the barricades. And there was one sole protester, sole delegate, who unfurled a Palestinian flag while the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was trying to talk about anything but Palestine, trying to talk about cost of living because he knows that that's what everyone wants him to talk about. What did happen, though, in the middle of the PM's speech is that a bunch of delegates from the Electrical Trades Union, as the PM got up to speak, they got up too and walked out. They boycotted the PM's speech. Again, the left loves to boycott things because, you know, when you stand up and walk out on someone, then they're going to suddenly change their mind about everything they've believed in their whole lives. Anyway, Albo, who, to his great credit, has already changed his mind about a couple of things he's believed, got up, did his speech, you know, rallied the troops. Obviously, we've got an election coming up at some point over the next 9 months. And, you know, he needs to use this opportunity. The first time that a New South Wales Premier and a New South Wales Prime Minister have been at the same Labor conference in God knows how long. This historic moment. Needs to get the party behind him. He's got, you know, he's flagging the polls. Dutton's creeping up on him. The coalition is ahead, according to a lot of polls, in two-party preferred terms. So he needs all the help he can get. And what do the left do? Those great champions of solidarity. What does this little rump of the left do to a left-wing Prime Minister from the left faction of the Labor Party? They get up and they walk out. They turn away. And why do they do this? For what noble cause? What possible thing could be more important than the sanctity and integrity of the great Australian Labor Party and the cause of the progressive left in Australia? It wasn't the war in Gaza, it was the war on John Setka. Because the ETU were upset that Anthony Albanese was cracking down on alleged corruption in the CFMEU. And yes, you heard all those capital letters correctly. Not even their own union. Another union that they just happen to like. They just happen to be comrades with, just happen to be aligned with. So these guys decided, and again, who gives a rat's? They can get up, they can walk. No one cares that much anyway. Although it could matter because there's some numbers going on I'll tell you about very shortly. These guys decide that the ditch they're going to die in, the thing that's worth, you know, trying to humiliate or undermine a crucial speech from a Prime Minister who's fighting for his political life, is that Prime Minister daring to tackle union corruption. You just wouldn't read about it. Unless, of course, you read my column, in which case you would have literally just read about it. So why did the ETU choose not the war in Gaza, but the war on John Setka to take their mighty stand on and to undermine their own Prime Minister in his greatest hour of need? Is it just because they love the CFMEU so very, very much? Do they all get together and gather in the woods and play African drums, do trust exercises? I'm not sure, quite possibly. Another possible reason is that if the CFMEU is disaffiliated from the Labor Party, They've already suspended it from the New South Wales branch, I believe, but the right already had the numbers there. The difference is that while the New South Wales branch is still dominated by the right faction of the Labor Party, right with a capital R and a small r, i.e. it is the correct faction and thank God it's in charge, the National Conference has just recently been taken over by the left faction of the party. And how did this happen? This happened because the ETU in every other state and territory of Australia is left-wing and has been so for a very long time, except in New South Wales, where that branch of the union was held by the right. And this was the case right up until a year or two ago, let's say a couple of years ago, when the left took over the right-wing branch of the ETU, which is, of course, the biggest state branch being New South Wales. And it is that takeover that flipped National Conference from being nominally dominated by the right, by a razor's edge, to nominally dominated by the left. There's all sorts of other comings and goings on, which are, quite frankly, impossible to understand. But either way, it was that branch, that very same branch of that very same union that walked out on the Prime Minister that were responsible just a couple of years ago for flipping the National Conference from the right to the left. Well done. Well done you, comrades. Problem is, if the CFMEU gets disaffiliated from the party, those numbers could flip back the other way. I haven't actually scribbled them out on the back of a beer coaster, and I'm not sure. You'd probably have to bring Stephen Hawking back from the dead in order to do that. So this could have profound consequences for the makeup of the entire Labor Party as a whole, because it used to be dominated by the right pretty much in the whole country, but these have been falling. New South Wales is now one of the few holdouts of right faction power in the Labor Party. South Australia is the other main one. The rest of the states and territories have pretty much gone by the wayside. Victoria, because of the clean out of the branches under Comrade Dan, Chairman Dan, has gone from right to left. Queensland also, because of this weird deal that was done between the AWU and the former Liquor, Hospitality and Miscellaneous Workers Union. Queensland has flipped from right to left as well. So there's all these sort of weird goings on that most people wouldn't realise was even happening, but have profound implications for the party and who is the leader of those states. So the left produces Daniel Andrews and Jacinta Allen in Victoria, produces Stephen Miles in Queensland, whereas the right produces people like Chris Minns in New South Wales and Peter Malinauskas in South Australia. I'll just leave you to be the judge on who's doing better in that little scenario. And of course, then we've got Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who is a member, he's the lord, the overlord of the left faction in New South Wales and the nation. But, of course, he is behaving very much as a member of the right wing of the Labor Party. He's become much more moderate. He's become a centrist over the past few years. He became a centrist when he became opposition leader and outflanked Bill Shorten, who ironically was from the right but talking like someone from the left. And Anthony Albanese basically said, well, I can play that game too. I'm from the left, but I'm going to talk like someone from the right and be more conciliatory to business, less class war rhetoric, less policies like the redistribution of wealth, if you like, from things like banning negative gearing and stuff like that. And that's how Anthony Albanese won. We'll be talking to the person who actually wrote the ALP's policy platform along those lines later in the show, so make sure you stick around for that. Point being, the Labor Party is just very, very weird. It's opposites day. Everyone's behaving like they're the opposite of what they actually are. And even within the left faction, this is going on. Because I hear you say, hang on a minute, these ETU delegates are from the left and Anthony Albanese is from the left. Why aren't they getting along? Why are these ETU delegates from the left walking out on the speech of a left faction Prime Minister? Well, there are actually two left factions. Yes, the left faction itself is split within itself between the soft left and the hard left. The other funny thing is, though, that the soft left is hard and the hard left is soft. So the soft left used to be in charge pretty much in New South Wales until a little guy called Anthony Albanese came along. And he basically took over and won the top spots because he's just an amazing organiser. He just runs the left machine. And he basically began his meteoric rise to power through Sussex Street, through being Assistant General Secretary of the Labor Party and then getting into Parliament and then eventually becoming leader of the opposition when Bill Shorten lost the unlosable election in 2019. And now, in case you've been asleep for the last 2 years, he's the Prime Minister. So that is Anthony Albanese. He is the leader of the hard left, even though the hard left is actually softer than the soft left. The soft left, also known as the Ferguson left, is the left that the CFMEU is a member of, is basically foundational to. And so the soft left is the faction of all those gentle, caring, soft, warm and fuzzy behaviours on construction sites that you might have been reading about in recent weeks and years. So the soft left and the hard left, in keeping with all rules of politics, hate each other more than they hate everybody else who's further away from them politically, which is always what happens in politics. You hate the person next to you more than you hate the person on the opposite side of the political spectrum. And so the ETU, who are aligned with, who have decided they're in love with, the CFMEU, who are at war within the left faction against their sub-factional nemesis, Anthony Albanese, decided that they've got to get up and walk out in the middle of the Prime Minister's speech at exactly the moment where you would think they would be rapt to be in the winner's circle. Does that make sense? Absolutely not. God, I love politics. The other big story on the weekend, of course, was the reshuffle, the cabinet reshuffle by the aforementioned Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, in what was an absolute foregone conclusion and the worst kept secret in Australian political history, Immigration Minister Andrew Giles was shafted, as was Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill, who is the senior minister to Andrew Giles in the Home Affairs portfolio, which is a new super portfolio put together by the previous government, in which immigration sits underneath Home Affairs. So far, so good. The problem is that as Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles was effectively responsible when the High Court made its decision for allowing a whole bunch of immigration detainees who had appalling criminal records loose into the community. The government had no legislation ready to stop them from being let out by the High Court. When it set just one free, they decided to just set everybody free for reasons probably best known to themselves, and then took their sweet-ass time in putting together any sort of policy response that would actually stop this from happening, that would enable them to be traced, that would enable them to be redetained in a way that would keep the community safe, and indeed failed to have any policy ready, even though the actual judge in the court case basically told them that she was going to do this. But anyway, I digress. Point being, Andrew Giles was always going to get shafted, by which I mean moved sideways. And no, it's not a shafting at all because everything's totally fine. He's done a great job and he's Anthony Albanese's factional ally and apparently helps him with the numbers in the left in Victoria. I don't really know how that works. I'm not even sure that it works. But anyway, that is the story. He's apparently in his inner circle. Poor old Albo, can't be perfect all the time. And so he's gone, and he has gone to a portfolio which probably few people even know exists. It's skills and training. You've never heard of it. You've never seen the minister who previously represented it. Chances are you couldn't name him in a police lineup. And he is now retired, and Godspeed and all the very best to him and his family as he goes. Point being, it's a portfolio that doesn't get into the headlines much, if at all, and that is exactly where the PM obviously wants Andrew Giles, while at the same time he can say, look, he's not sacked, he hasn't been forced to resign, he hasn't even been demoted, he's just been moved around a cabinet reshuffle caused by the retirement of two ministers, that being Brendan O'Connor, the aforementioned skills minister, who I'm sure you've never heard of, and Linda Burney, who you probably have heard of, the Indigenous Affairs minister, who is retiring. Now, the other interesting move was putting Claire O'Neill, who, yes, the buck stops with her with this immigration fiasco, but doesn't appear that she was actually personally sort of responsible for the handling of it. It seems that that was Andrew Giles's stuff up, but she is, of course, left holding the baby, so to speak, and she therefore has to carry some of the blame. And of course, it would be a bad look if you got rid of Giles. He'd look like you're sort of throwing someone under the bus to protect the senior minister. And so she has had to go as well. She's under a lot of pressure. And she goes into a portfolio that is the very opposite of the skills and training portfolio that Giles has gone into, where he will spend a very quiet life behind a curtain somewhere. She has gone into housing and homelessness. Now, normally this would also be that kind of backwater portfolio. In fact, the last time Labor was in government, this wasn't even a cabinet position. Tanya Plibersek, in fact, who has been studiously ignored by Anthony Albanese, in part also because of those sort of factional rivalries and the fact that she ran as deputy to Bill Shorten against him in the previous Labor leadership challenge. But anyway, she took that portfolio the last time Labor was in government and came to government from opposition. And she made it her own. She worked really, really hard and she made it fantastic. But it wasn't even it was a ministry, but it wasn't in cabinet the last time around. That's how historically sort of second tier this portfolio has been. But of course, this time round, we've got a cost of living crisis. And at the very, very apex of that crisis is a cost of housing crisis, to the point where there's a rental crisis as well as a housing affordability crisis. It's just crisis, and it needs to be fixed. We all know that the government has reached an agreement with all the states and territories to hit this massive target of new housing that it is simply not going to hit. In fact, the New South Wales government has already come out and said, no, we're not going to get there, sorry. And it has to do this in partnership with states. And it knows it can't. It knows it will almost certainly not be able to meet the targets that it has set for itself. But it's got to bloody try and it's got to get somewhere. Otherwise, it will just be an absolute, crisis. So what has Albo done? He's taken a senior minister in a really, really senior portfolio, someone who has had a kind of, watch this space sign over their head for many, many years, who hasn't, it's fair to say, done all she could have possibly dreamed of in the portfolio, the dream portfolio she was given. And so he's taken it and basically jammed her into this other portfolio, which needs an absolute miracle, which needs some kind of, lightning bolt to turn it around and make things happen. And that is exactly the sort of minister you want to put there. You basically take someone who's had a bit of the shine wear off their kind of bauble and you say, right, here is your legacy project. Here is your chance to redeem your reputation, to prove your mettle, and to stamp your name in the history books. And he's done it before. It's the exact same thing he did with Bill Shorten. Again, disability was once a kind of backwater portfolio. In fact, it was a portfolio, and again, there's a lot of history kind of repeating itself. I think Mark Twain said history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. There's a lot of history rhyming here. Bill Shorten was initially really disgruntled when he got a very minor portfolio under Kevin Rudd, and he was, I think, an assistant minister with charge of disabilities. But he just went, right, that's it. And of course, Bill Shorten thought he was going to be Prime Minister one day. A lot of people expected him to be, and he came within a bee's proverbial appendage of being Prime Minister. And here he is, schlepping it round in this sort of, human affairs portfolio at the bottom sort of rung of the ministerial ladder, and Shorten threw everything at it. And people remember him as being one of the best ministers for people with disabilities they'd ever seen. So he took this tiny little thing and just threw everything at it. And that is exactly what he was tasked with doing when Albo came around. Unfortunately for Bill, knocked Bill from the top position in the Labor Party. And Albo said, right, I'm going to take you, I'm going to stick you in the NDIS portfolio. You are going to, and again, just like housing, you're going to fix this thing that's in absolute crisis, the worst performing thing in our government and the thing that so many millions of people are completely dependent on, just like housing. And you are going to go there and fix it. And of course, what does Bill Shorten do? He goes, right, I'll show him. He says, I might not be Prime Minister, but this will be my legacy. This will be where my name is etched in the history books. And so it's actually a really good move. You take a portfolio that's, the size of whatever it is, and you shove a prime ministerial sized ego into it. And then you just watch that little thing go. So that's the thinking behind that. I think Claire O'Neill is actually a very competent minister, and I think she's done a lot of other good stuff in home affairs, and she was doing great work, overhauling the migration system before this scandal landed at her feet, courtesy of the immigration minister below her. So what can I say? Watch this space. Another interesting story I saw this week was by the Centre for Independent Studies, which is a conservative think tank, which released a report about what people think about companies, quote unquote, going woke, things that are called like the traditional bottom line, including environmental and social outcomes, diversity outcomes in the company's performance, instead of just, how much profit it makes for shareholders. And it found, perhaps unsurprisingly, that most shareholders and most employees didn't really give a rat's about what a company had to say on social or political issues. They just wanted to do their job and get out of there, or if they were shareholders, they just wanted their cash. Thank you very much. And they did all this research that tracked how much people were engaged with the position that the company took, how much stakeholders like shareholders or employees were engaged with what the company was saying about things like, for example, same-sex marriage or the voice to parliament. And it found there was very minimal engagement. Very, very few were tiny minority were really closely following it, and some kind of, kept half an eye on it. In other words, any claim that these were sort of things that were driven by companies, shareholders demanding a stronger stance on climate change, or by employees wanting to be proud for the company they work for, were rubbish. It's just the company trying to basically boost its brand and say, hey, we're not just an evil corporation. We also really care about things. We care about the environment. We care about, First Nations people, whatever. Anyway, the reason I thought that was very, very interesting is because I was pretty closely involved with the campaign for the voice to parliament, which was an absolute debacle. Unfortunately, I wasn't closely involved enough, it would seem, but I was a very strong supporter, and I was in touch with a lot of the people who were running the campaign, and less so with a lot of people who were basically sabotaging it with incredibly stupid statements, and other people who were just so incredibly disorganised that the whole campaign fell into a hot mess. And the result of that went basically from about 60-40 people in Australia being in favour of a voice to parliament before the campaign started, to about 60-40 people in Australia being against the voice to parliament by the time the campaign ended. And that tells you everything you need to know about a campaign when it's actually turning people away from them the longer it goes on and the more they see of it. And there was a bloke brought in sort of late in the game to try to fix all these myriad problems, and unfortunately he couldn't, obviously. But I remember saying to him that it was just terrible having all these, one of the really big problems with the campaigns was all these big corporate entities were lending all their support and all their cash to this campaign. And this didn't help it at all. In fact, it turned people off. Suddenly people, and again, there's plenty of reasons for this, but people were saying, hang on, this is my decision. I shouldn't be told what I should be voting for by, Qantas or, Woolworths or whatever it may be. This is my decision. So people started to clearly say, well, F you, I'm just going to flip you the bird, because this makes it sound like a sort of elite top-down organisation or an elite top-down movement or campaign instead of a grassroots one. It made people feel also that something that they might have wanted to do out of the goodness of their own heart, they were now being lectured to or lectured about by people, by higher-ups, be they in government or be they in business, and that kind of just left a nasty taste in their mouth. Anyway, so I say to this guy, I said, mate, you've got to just, the corporates are killing this campaign. All this corporate support is destroying it. And I said, you've got to stop, don't try to solicit anymore. Don't try to get any more. And he goes, mate, we're not. I know. He completely agreed. So the problem is they're all trying to jump on board, and it looks worse if we say, no, you can't, because it's a bad look. Imagine if that got out. And it would just be an impossible thing to say anyway. And so that, I think, is the ultimate irony. It wasn't even the campaign necessarily itself that was reaching out, although I'm sure there was a bit of that, quite frankly. But these corporations, corporate entities, big organisations trying to say, hey, look, everybody, look over here, we're in favour of the voice, and trying to attach themselves to this campaign so that it made their brand look better and show everybody how caring and touchy-feely they were. They were like the bloke who's drowning, grabbing onto the person trying to rescue him and pulling him under the water as well. They became, in their desperation to sort of jump on board this thing, they were actually pulling the whole thing down. And of course, we all know how that turned out. Our next guest is someone who literally wrote the book on Labor politics. He actually wrote the new Labor platform that they took to the 2022 election and got elected as a result of. He's also a very smart cook. He's a Fulbright Scholar who was studying in Washington, D.C., so he knows everything about US politics as well. And he was also a war correspondent in Ukraine during Russia's invasion of it. So he's got a bit going on, and he joins me right now. Misha Zelinksky, welcome to The Real Story. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, Joe. Good to be with you, mate.
Mate, great to have you. First up, let's just get your thoughts on the conference, the Labor conference over the weekend. Obviously a very big weekend for Labor. We had the PM and the Premier address the New South Wales conference, which people were worried might explode over the Palestine issue. And then, of course, the PM's reshuffle on the Sunday. What did you make of it all?
Well, it was a little bit anticlimactic. So we arrived there early on.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. A quiet conference is a good conference, Joe.
Right.
But we arrived there early Saturday morning, and there's talk of 20,000 protesters. The security protocols were very different on this occasion. A lot of police, and you had to have a special code to get in. Not like in political sense, like a literal physical code. They got sent to you in the mail.
Wow.
And so, but it rained.
Yeah.
And so
protesters don't like rain.
Yeah, that's it. Trots melt in the wet. But so as it turned out, there were some protesters, but it was not as chaotic as they were anticipating. In terms of the conference itself, you mentioned the PM was there, the Premier were there. That's actually the first time since 1941 that Labor's had a situation where we've had a first-term federal government and a first-term New South Wales state government at the same time.
Both leaders from the state of New South Wales as well.
That's right, Curtin, Chifley, and obviously McKell. So bit of a quirky history, so a long time. And so, in New South Wales, we've been out of government for some time now. And so it was a great feeling, to be honest, to have the PM there, to have the state premier there, Anthony Albanese and Chris Minns. So it was a really good feeling, to be honest, overall.
And what did you make of the walkout of the ETU delegates during the PM's address?
A bit of I didn't even notice that they left.
Yeah.
So, look, I mean, people are entitled to do what they want. I'm not sure if alleged corruption in the CFMEU is the hill you want to die on, but if people want to choose to do that. But ultimately, it was a very small cohort of a small amount of one union, and didn't really disrupt the conference at all. And
you're a former top union official yourself. Obviously, the leanings of the unions play a huge role in whether or not the right or the left have the numbers at both state and federal conference. The right, thank God, have the numbers at state level in New South Wales. The left have just got the edge. If the CFMEU was to be disaffiliated from the Labor Party, would that swing the balance back in favour of the right at a national level?
It maybe make it right in balance again. I don't know the exact numbers. For the purists playing along at home, and I'm sure they're on the edge of their seat as to how factional.
All three listeners are going, right, okay, I'm pulling
Labor
up.
factionalism as you are, Joe. But the CFMEU in New South Wales are part of a different part of the left, their own part of the left called the soft left. Nationally, they're in sort of another group called the industrial left in Victoria and other parts. So the CFMEU don't sit within the kind of the hard left, the Anthony Albanese left. They're in a little bit their own subgroup. They do tend to caucus with the left nationally, but they have separately voted against what the left have wanted in the past. So, for example, going right back in history, in the 2015 National Conference, a bill was leader talking about turnbacks at the time. The CFMEU voted with the right to make turnbacks policy, which in the end has become Labor's policy nationally. So they move around a bit, but I'd suggest it's tighten the numbers right up again at a national level.
That's right. And also the CFMEU is factionally split within the union itself.
That's
with
right.
The mining and energy division and the construction division. But we'll better stop now before we lose
That's right.
three listeners
they're
we
on
have
board
left.
already.
That's
Yeah,
right.
right.
Let's go to something that is absolutely never boring, which is Donald J. Trump. How do you see the election campaign playing out now that Kamala Harris is cert to get the Democratic
There's
nomination?
Kamala Mentum, as they say. Look, I think a lot of people are skeptical of Kamala Harris. I've got to say that if I was choosing a candidate for the Democrats, and you know my feelings there, I think Donald Trump is a clear and present threat to democracy, not just in the United States, but everywhere around the world. She would not be my choice of candidate. However, I think the number one mood in the country leading into Joe Biden's decision to not stand again for election in 2024 for a second term, the mood of the electorate is not so much polarized Republican Democrat though it is, it was very much not these two old blokes.
Yeah.
Now a lot of the focus was
I think
on
they call that the double haters.
right, exactly. And so people are like,
this
this can't be it. We can't be getting served up a guy we threw out once and a guy who's nearly 82 asking to be 86 at the end of a second term. And so I always thought the party that was able to break with their incumbent first would be the party to get the biggest boost. Now, the Republicans were unable to shake Trump through the primaries, but with Biden doing an extraordinary service, no politician gives up power willfully.
Could have done it sooner, though.
I think that would have been right. I actually wrote a column in January of 2023, which has aged very well.
There you go.
Saying that I didn't think Biden should run again. I love Joe Biden. He's a personal hero of mine. He's a fantastic politician. He's exactly the style of politics that I think center-left party should be. Very working-class oriented, very economic issues at the forefront, but Father Time undefeated, right? And so, but I think it's recast the election, I think, with Biden going. You can't win an election, Joe, if 3 out of 4 voters don't believe you have the cognitive capacity to be president.
That's right, yeah. And I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that he should have stood aside. He should have stood aside a long time ago, as you have said, for even longer than I've been saying. And obviously, Joe Biden's listening to neither of us.
No, he's listening. I think he tuned out after the factual stuff, but if he's back here listening again,
that's right.
Apologies, Joe.
But do you think Kamala Harris obviously is someone who has not impressed as Veep? She's got a big bounce in the polls, though. It's got that momentum you're talking about. She's now either neck and neck or probably marginally ahead.
Well, there's a new poll that dropped today, which is very interesting. Arizona, Harris is ahead by 2, but in Michigan, ahead by 11.
Yeah, I know.
Now, that could be a rogue poll, but I definitely think what's consistent is there's been a surge. Now, whether or not that's a complete surge, but fascinating that those are 2 states that are absolutely pivotal. Biden won Arizona and Michigan. Whoever wins the election is going to need to carry those states. And so I think it's real. And I think the relief, there is a real genuine relief that there's a fresh choice. Now, the way these things tend to go is you get a surge, there's a great bit of excitement, and then people then take a second look. Now, Harris will get a second look at her and people will assess her record. Now, her challenge is, yes, she's not Joe Biden, but she's still carrying his record on inflation. And I think really particularly, we talked about turnbacks before, on the border.
Yes, absolutely.
The border is a real big problem for the Democrats. But I think it shows that switching candidates has paid off so far. And I think if Harris goes on to win, it's a big if, and my friends were all mocking me. They said, oh, you think Harris can win? I said, look, Biden can't win. Harris could win.
Yes.
I think that we now have a race. But when this is written, if Harris was to go on and win, I think people look back at the choice of J.D. Vance as the running mate for Trump. I think that was, if he had it over again, I think Trump's already regretting it. I think he's not.
There's talk he might actually swop him out, but I think that's.
Look, I mean, again, like he might. I mean, Donald Trump, mate, he's loyal to himself and himself only. It'd be challenging for him because now that he's picked a hardcore MAGA type to throw him off the ticket. Trump could probably pull it off, but it would not be without risk. But it just shows you that how confident they were. That was hubris, in my opinion, to select a guy who doesn't balance your ticket at all. Right?
Yeah, what's missing on this ticket? More Donald Trump.
Right. And so, if Trump he wouldn't do it, but if he picked Nikki Haley,
Yep.
That would have been a very savvy pick. Trump thought, you know what, let's just double down, go for broke. And I think it's backfired and all this weird stuff. What's really interesting, the talking point now that the Democrats seemingly are tagging really well on Trump and Vance is these guys are kind of weird.
Yeah,
they want to take away abortion rights. They want to give voting rights to people who have children. Like you essentially be voting on the behalf of your kids, like in a college-style vote.
Yeah.
It's odd. All these weird policies around women's reproductive rights, around family rights, all a bit odd. And this Project 2025 stuff, which is really kind of batty kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
I think
Well,
that's now getting into the public consciousness.
And Kamala is going really hard on abortion. Biden, I don't know if it's because of his Catholicism or whatever, but he didn't want to go too hard on it.
Yep.
She's not afraid to do that. It's probably easier and more apt for her to do it as a woman as well.
Yeah.
And
it polls
and that
terribly.
is something that's right. Polls terribly for the Republicans, doesn't it?
Terribly, terribly. You see now, this is the thing around Trump being a great election winner. He's actually a real big loser. He fluked in 2016, then lost terribly in 2018 midterms, lost in 2020. And in 2022, the Republicans got pumped effectively everywhere and all this special elections since. And at top of the ticket of the debate, often in special ballots or referenda, has been the question of reproductive rights. And even in deep red states like Kansas, voters there have said, no, like we're not for like sort of 1950s, like 1800s style laws around reproductive rights for women. It's absurd. And so there's no constituency. What's happened here is the Republicans have been kind of like the dog that caught the political car. For a long time, they've been promising, their conservative Bible Belt base that, we'll repeal Roe v. Wade, we'll get rid of abortion rights, but they never thought it would actually happen.
That's right. And now they've done it, everyone's going, oh.
And it polls at 25% popularity. So 3 in 4 people think it's a stupid idea, and rightly so. It's nuts.
And this is where the problems have started to emerge with Trump and Project 2025. So Project 2025 is this ultra-conservative Republican group that is actually kind of to the right of Donald Trump.
Correct.
And so Trump has actually had to say these guys, I think his campaign director actually said, these guys are a pain in the ass.
Right.
They're actually too right-wing for us.
Well, indeed. But you know who wrote that platform? All of Donald Trump's staffers, right, in the first term. And you know who wrote the preface to the Project 2025 drum roll? J.D. Vance. So you can run, but you can't hide, Donald, when it comes to Project 2025. It is.
Very
it's a problem.
sticky.
And so it's interesting that people have been talking about 2025 now, Project 2025, for a couple of years, and it's quite scary and dark. It is a real dark view of the world, but it's been quite niche, and it's now managed to make its way into the public consciousness. And the Democrats have been really trying to find a way to make the future of democracy central to their campaign, but they've talked a lot about Jan 6. That's been terrible. It was terrible what happened on Jan 6, completely unacceptable. And, free and fair elections and the peaceful transfer of power is central to democracy. But it's backward looking.
Yes. That's right.
Even though I agree, it's egregious what happened that day. Talking about the past, elections are about the future. And so what 2025 is actually look at what these guys want to do if they get in. They've got a game plan. It's quite scary.
And that's obviously been working for them because the head of Project 2025 has basically announced in the last couple of days he's just going to fold the lot. It's like we're just packing up shop. We're just going to disappear, like one of those, like the deep state, or one of those kind of weird spooky stalls in The Simpsons where when they turn around again, it just vanishes.
Yeah, look, I think the damage is done on that, so they could delete their website, but the documentation will live on. And in a way, even just disappearing gives it some other added level of mystique or scariness. So I think it's in the consciousness now. Trump's quite good at running away from things that he wants to distance himself from, but his problem is so much of the Republican base are rallied around this concept of tearing apart the government, removing people's civil rights, fiddling with electoral systems. So I think that's a real electoral millstone around his neck.
And we saw that a bit in the midterms in 2022, didn't we? When the platform that you had to have to get pre-selected as a candidate by the Trumpian Republican Party was anathema to a platform that could get you elected at a general election. So people couldn't people who could win a general election couldn't win the pre-selection to run in a general election.
Correct. No, that's exactly
and now
right.
Trump's suffering from that himself.
Correct. And they blew a number of Senate seats and House seats. Everyone's talking about there'd be a red wave in 2022 because of inflation, et cetera. It didn't happen. Why? Quality of candidates.
They were too far gone.
Yeah, they were just really bad candidates in a general election because the truth of the matter is we talk a lot about the US being polarized, but people still want relatively mainstream people to talk about their issues, not about odd grievances that are very niche and fringe. It's just what a lot of the MAGA stuff is. It's fringe stuff.
So Trump has been pulling back, and JD Vance has been pulling his head in a bit about stuff that he said that was both to the right and to the left of Trump. It's this weird, really weird mixed bag. But, on the abortion issue, for example, Trump has said he's not going to ban the abortion pill that is the most common form in the US, but Project 2025 wanted to, which is an example of why they were far to the right of him on what could be a really hot button, bring out the vote issue. Let's say Donald Trump does kind of continue apace, get rid of Project 2025. He tries to present as a more moderate candidate, which is I struggle to articulate because it was in the same sense as Donald Trump. but he's amazingly charismatic. He's amazingly entertaining. He's amazingly good at getting momentum and getting attention. Is Kamala, do you reckon, at the high water mark? Is this the honeymoon, the sugar hit, and then it sort of tapers down and it's all a question of where it meets Trump? Or how do you think it plays out from here on in?
Well, it all comes down to swing states, right? And so I think we talked about the polling in Michigan. That's interesting because Biden was behind in all the swing states after the debate. He just clawed back, actually, to be in front in enough of them. So really it's going to come down to Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
She's going after Georgia now as well.
Yeah, Georgia will be potentially in play because of one of the big things that had happened over the last 4 years was the softening of support in the vote amongst black voters, particularly young black men. So she's clawed back some of that, though not all of it. So that will bring Georgia in with a larger black population. But I think fundamentally, I think some of this is going to come down to money and organising clearly, but also it'll come down to, is the election about the future? If the election is considered to be about the future, then I think people will rally around Harris. But if it becomes a referendum on how the Biden presidency is gone, and whether or not, if the focus is on that, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Then I think then Trump has a chance. But at this point, it's an even race. I think Harris has had a surge that will naturally drop down. The big choice for her now is VP, and she's got some interesting choices. There's, do you go with a balancing option, as we talked about? An old white guy, right? Is kind of, do you go with the Mark Kelly, who's the Arizona senator? He's a Top Gun fighter pilot.
I was going to say
an astronaut.
That's right. Just looking at him, he's got the combat jacket.
Yeah.
He's
from a border state, so
right.
He understands migration. But then people might say, well, does that only highlight the fact that, as inverted commas, Joe Biden's borders are, Harris doesn't have a good record on migration? Do you go with someone like Josh Shapiro, who's really charismatic governor of Pennsylvania? Yep. Brilliant. Having said that, he's a Jewish guy, and so there's a view like, do you have a minority candidate, a black woman at the top of the ticket and a Jewish character, a Jewish leader at the bottom of the ticket? What does that then do in Michigan, where there's a very large Muslim vote there? So it's complex, and every choice you make, there's trade-offs. Pete Buttigieg is another option. He's the Secretary for Transport, brilliant guy, but really probably the best communicator in the Democratic Party, but he's also an openly gay guy. And the question is America ready for a lot of change? He's a black woman president and a gay guy.
I think you can definitely run Pete Buttigieg against anyone but Donald Trump.
Maybe
in the
that's
future.
right.
But when you
and he's a young guy and he's got time, but these are the choices, and all those choices will feed into it. If I had to bet, I'd say it's either Kelly or Shapiro, and you maybe go with Shapiro because for Harris to win, she has to carry Pennsylvania. If she carries Pennsylvania, Trump's toast pretty much, and so Shapiro is very popular.
And does the fact that he's Jewish ameliorate her hardline stance against Israel?
Maybe
more
that's
hardline
right.
Than Biden.
Maybe that's right, but at the same time, one of the things that was a drag for Biden was young voters having being very aggrieved about what they were seeing in Gaza. And so as a result, you were seeing quite a bit of softening in support for Biden. One, he's an old guy. Away. And two, on the campuses, there's a lot of support for, the Palestinian cause. But in particular, there's a very, very large Muslim Arab world diaspora there. And there was the write-in campaign, not essentially vote for no one. And that was like 100,000 people. And, the vote there was only carried by around 10,000. So they could be definitive there. So, these things are always
and I think more than 100,000 young voters have just signed up after Kamala basically picked up the torch
Yeah.
to register to vote, I should say.
Yeah.
Misha Zelinksky, national security nerd extraordinaire, foreign policy nerd
Mate.
extraordinaire, Fulbright Scholar from Washington, D.C., Labor Party insider, Labor Party gospel
outsider
writer,
these days.
outsider these days, and former top union official, the power behind the throne at the almighty AWU. Thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story.
Thanks so much. A great opportunity to plug the book, mate. The Sun Will Rise, available in all bookstores or on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. Thanks so much. Joe loves it. He hasn't read it, but look.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
As I say to
No,
everyone,
thanks.
mate, it's a short read, so be over mercifully quickly if you don't like it.
It's so good that I'm saving it. No, do go and get this book. It is absolutely fantastic.
Thank
you. Speak to you soon, champion.
Cheers.
As I said, we had a super bumper show this week and we've gone right over time. But I do just want to get to one question, and that's from Richie in Melb. He says, is Joe Hildebrand going to comb his hair? No. And that's really all we have time for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Real Story. If you love what you hear, or even if you just like what you hear, if it's in the friend zone, just leave us a rating and a review. If you hate what you hear, do not tell a soul. Do not put it in writing. Take that secret to your grave. If you want to reach out to us or ask us a question, ask me anything. Seriously, that's a good name for a TV show, actually. I might just make a note of that. You can drop me an email, therealstory@novapodcast.com.au, or you can just send me a DM on Instagram. My handle is @Joe_Hildebrand. And if you can't get enough of me, I've got columns, of course, in the Daily Telegraph every Monday and every Saturday until the day I die. I'll chat to you next week.